Yes, there it is. Ta-da!
There we go.
As my mother would say, now we're cooking with gas. So
Uh, Classic phrase. But anyways, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Station Square podcast. We kind of had some just figuring out this whole new Zoom technical doohickeys and whatnot. But yeah, hope everybody's staying safe out there and they're enjoying this lovely Southern California storm, rain, because Lord, boy, howdy, do we really need it during this drought. So today, I figured, you know what, might as well adjust this time to just speak to a very, very, very well-known name in the animation industry. He has done work for, I mean, as I'm seeing, if you look from his collection of books and gallery right behind him, you should know that he's worked on um, a lot of impactful films and films that have been like, part of our childhoods. And to say, I mean, I'm just kind of rambling on at this point. So, yeah, allow me to introduce Mr. Tom Sito or Sito. I usually I'm sorry,
Sito.
Sito. Yes. Okay. So it's kind of like this thing on the podcast where I just kind of mispronounce people's last names for some reason. So, bear with me. So, anyways, thank you for joining me today.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. And what I usually do is I have the guests, um, give their body of like, list their resume and portfolio, what stuff that you've been doing, what you've done, and what you're working on today. And yeah, just to know a little bit more about you.
Okay, hi. So yeah, I was originally born in New York City, and I was born in Brooklyn before it was cool, when it was a dump, and and now it's too hip. But I got into animation in the mid 1970s, working for Richard Williams on a feature musical called The Adventures of Raggedy Ann and Andy, and made a lot of good friends. And I was kind of fortunate in that I began my career in animation when a lot of golden age artists were ending their careers. And Dick Williams loved hiring like famous old animators and pairing them up with young people. So, I had a chance to work with Art Babbitt, who's the guy who created Goofy and the Queen and Snow White and Geppetto. I also got to assist Grim Natwick, who was the animator who took a blank piece of paper and designed Betty Boop. And it's funny because he was like 87 and I was like, 20. It was like, and I was absolutely terrified, but it was great fun. And yeah, since then I kind of moved around to New York and Canada and Hollywood. And I was working at Richard. I started at Disney. Well, in the '80s, I did He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and She-Ra and all, and storyboarded and directed those. And then I started at again working with Richard Williams on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, originally in England, in London, and then came back to Disney, and I was an artist on Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, uh, Fantasia, Pocahontas, and then I went over with the first group to form DreamWorks, and was a story artist on Prince of Egypt, and was had a story for a while on Shrek, on the first Shrek, and then Spirit, the horse picture, and then I went over to Warner Brothers to direct Osmosis Jones with Chris Rock and Lawrence Fishburne and all. And that was so successful when it came out that I was soon on the street looking for work. And well, and and also did Looney Tunes back in action later on. And yeah, and currently I'm a professor teaching animation at the University of Southern California, and I've written a couple of books, mostly about animation history, because being in touch with and knowing a lot of the older artists, I was sort of able to get their stories. So I wrote a book about the animation unions, focusing on the Disney strike of 1941. I wrote a history of computer graphics because I basically just watched it happen. I mean, when I was starting, the most technologically important thing we had was a electric pencil sharpener. You didn't have to turn the little crank, and now everything's digital. But I remember when that was all happening. And the last thing I did was just a little crazy. But I figured the holidays are coming up. Was I actually wrote a cookbook.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's all animation people. So because when I worked with Grim Natwick, the creator Betty Boot, he was from Missouri originally, and when we were done, he gave me his chili recipe. And I got Grim Natwick's chili recipe, and I got another recipe from I got a Walt Disney's chili recipe, and I got Mark Davis's favorite martini. And then when I was in Japan judging a children's film festival, some of the guys at Ghibli gave me Miyazaki's personal ramen recipe, and I found out a lot of animators like to cook. When you because you spend all your time staring into a screen, staring at this light for hours and hours, and it gets really exhausting. So you want to do something where you're not hurting your eyes. So I notice a lot of artists like to do things like garden or and a lot of people like to cook. So I joke with my publisher and I said I could do a cookbook, and they're like, "That's a great idea." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I started asking old animators and all, like, if they had a favorite recipe. And yeah, I got a recipe from Chuck Jones's family and from Frank Thomas's family and from Bill Hanna of Hanna-Barbera. Plus modern people like Pete Docter and Michael Giacchino and all. And they all sent me recipe, and it's things from very complicated recipes to very simple. So like some artists actually are like gourmets and are actually do like a lot of like heavy duty cooking, and then some have very simple stuff. There was a guy who did death metal videos named John Schnepp, who passed away a year ago, but he gave me a recipe for picklebacks, which is take a shot of bourbon, take a shot of pickle juice, throw back one, throw back the other, repeat. Like, okay. It runs the gamut from very complicated to very simple. But that's what I've been working. That came out really nice, very, and put a lot of good little stories in it too, besides just cooking. Just like side things, like artists used to play practical jokes on one another, and just regular studio life. What it's like that. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
It kind of answers a lot of questions.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Just definitely makes my job a lot easier. Um, and it's really interesting that you mentioned Roger Rabbit because I see the little guy just hanging out right behind you. Yep,
That's
there he is. Yeah,
yeah. Right.
yeah. So it's really sweet. And speaking of Richard Williams, I actually do have his the Animator Survival Kit, the Master Edition. And I know it. I have it sitting. Just give me 1 second. I know I have it somewhere. Uh, okay. Yeah, so this book is just really, yeah. I was surprised at how gigantic this really is. Like, you have all of these pages here. I don't know if you can see very well, but yeah, it just is filled with so much that he just went through over the years, over his time of working in animation. So that's pretty much what I got because I'm somebody who is always like, I just love animation. That's actually how I got into. It was interesting. I became interested with performing, creating content for like, and I know that there's like other podcasts out there that they have a huge love and passion for animation. Like recently with the what's that one pod? Who's in My Head podcast that you were on with Julian and the crew.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So it's watching podcasts like, What's in My Head that just really, and when you give insightful interviews about working in the industry, that's, getting to speak with so many people throughout the years and just learning just the nuts and bolts of the behind the scenes of how these movies are made. It just always fascinated me, even as a very, very young kid.
mhm,
So it's just, um, I'm just so honored to just be speaking with somebody who has worked for as long, especially working with legends, like you said, with Chuck Jones, Richard Williams, and a bunch of others that I'm leaving out. It's just, it feels very, very like humbling. It really is.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah. So you said that you were born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. How would you say that the industry was like? Because I know that it is much different now than it was back in the day. So how would you say that like when you first got started, like being born from New York, how would you say that the whole atmosphere was like for you as a young
Well,
animation student?
yeah, well, yeah, there was a lot of change from when I started, and in fact, the book I'm currently writing right now is I'm writing a book about the animation renaissance, like 1986 to 2003, where where in the 70s, animation was seen as a dying art form. Like wasn't a lot of animation being done. I mean, the Disney guys did their films every once in a while, but really they relied on the revenue from the theme parks to keep the company going. And there was that generational shift where the golden age artists who had done the beautiful movies in the 40s and 30s and 40s, they were retiring, and kids like me were coming in. And a lot of the old guys would say to me things like, "Don't bother with animation. That's dying. That's not going anywhere. Get a real job." Or one old animator told me and Eric Goldberg, like, all that um, old animation you love, like Pinocchio and Tex Avery and all that stuff was done with depressionary economics. That's never coming back. The future is more movies like Yellow Submarine, more Yellow Submarine." And that was the prevailing wisdom of the time. Like in 1975, if you told me, like, 15 years in the future, the most popular show on television is going to be a primetime cartoon with a yellow kid with a jagged head who says cowabunga, I'd say you're out of your mind. It was impossible. But yet all that turnover happened in the late 80s, where suddenly, like, animation was cool again, and animation for adults, which is that, in most countries of the world, in a lot of, Europe and Japan and different places, um uh, you know uh, adults reading comic books and watching animation is considered normal. There's adult comics and there's children's comics. And in America, it fell into this rut of animations just for kids, period. It's just for kids. And it took a long time to kind of break us out of that mindset and get into the point where, no, as an adult, you can enjoy some animation. It's fine. It was such a big breakthrough, it was such a revelation when Beauty and the Beast came out, and I would go, like, on a Wednesday night to the local Burbank theater, and there's like a 10:30 at night show, and there's a line to get in, all adults, no children, to see an animated film. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, this is what we wanted. This is what we've all been working towards, is to create that kind of atmosphere. So it was a long time coming, and I feel like, now that I'm like in my 60s and all, I feel like we're sort of passing on a healthier industry than the one we inherited, and hopefully it'll keep going on.
Oh yeah. Um, and it's just really interesting with how you said that, with this mentality that all animation is for kids when it's clearly not. It's always meant to be for all ages. I know when you go back to like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were like, keep in mind, this was back during the time that they were releasing these shorts before a movie. So they were just kind of like shorts that they would play in theaters, and it wouldn't be until years later that they started getting the recognition that they very much deserve. I'm talking like Disney, Warner Brothers, MGM, Walter Lantz, The Fleischers, and it just kind of goes on. So, um, and it was just really like when we see how animation had definitely evolved like during those times, because it's really like it's funny that you say that like it was kind of like a dying art, like I mean I know that it was during the time that like it wasn't really doing so hot until like I want to say the 80s 90s I want to say so it was really, I mean, it's fun when you go back and say that, like, oh, it's kind of a dying art. It's like those days are long gone. But then, like, people didn't realize at the time that a new generation of artists are just leading the next generation of cartoonists to people that are going to become like future, like, big names in the industry. And now we're seeing that. I mean, I just did an interview with Fred Seibert, who has worked with Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and we were just talking about like how every generation there's always going to be someone who is inspired by this one person, and they're going to create their own. They're going to leave their mark on the industry, and the process is going to keep continuing because animation is going to continue to. It's going to keep on growing. It's going to keep on evolving, and like with what we're getting with technology and other techniques and software that we're learning even to this very day. Like, I'd say that animation, it's certainly not going to go away anytime soon, and it's nowhere near like I'm not even sure if like it has weakened one iota. I think it's just going to continue to grow, and it's showing no signs of dying anytime soon. And who knows what the future is going to bring? Who knows?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. I mean, when I was starting, there was a clear delineation between that you either did cartoon animation or you worked on grown-up films, and
yeah.
there was a big divide between them. Now everything's all mixed up where there's a lot of animation in everything we do. Everything you look at on your phone or watch on broadcast and all, there's so much animation involved in it. I was talking with a friend of mine who works at Weta down in New Zealand, and he worked on all the Lord of the Rings movies and all. And he had just finished Guardians of the Galaxy, and I said, okay, Richie, so which Rocket, the raccoon, with the big gun, and Groot, the tree. I said, how
Mhm.
have they done? What was the process? And he goes, oh, they're keyframe. He goes, okay, so they're animated, like just like Bart Simpson or Bugs Bunny or Ariel, they're animated. It's just the rendering looks more realistic to match with live action. So they're animated characters working alongside live characters. And he's like, yeah, yeah. So I said, okay. Just like the last star, the Rise of Skywalker, I think you had two actors in that movie who are dead, like Carrie Fisher and Peter Cushing, yet they're still acting. Like they brought those characters, and and there's a certain amount of animation involved in that as well. You think about a movie like well, like the Avatar movies. It's like the Avatar movies of James Cameron can actually qualify as an animated feature if they wanted to, because it's 70% animation. It's like how much live action was in the first Avatar? About like 5 minutes of Sigourney Weaver smoking a cigarette in a laboratory, and the guy in the wheelchair climbing on the sunbed, and all the rest is animation. you know, there's no 7 foot blue people walking around riding flying dragons. It's that's all animation.
Yeah, like I said, technology is just, yeah, it's just, I just don't even know how they do it, but hey, I mean, like, when you really go back and, like, learn how, like, Walt Disney got his movies made, it's really amazing that, they're now regarded as the beloved classics that they are today. Like particularly the first five, like Snow White, Fantasia, Pinocchio, Dumbo, Bambi. It's kind of like I think I kind of considered that as like um, the finest. Like this was kind of like the period where like Disney, like as far as the art form goes, like in animation history, I think Disney was kind of like at the top of the industry. And then you mentioned there was the strike of 1941, which is something that Disney in its lifetime had never really truly recovered from, which is quite unfortunate. But I don't really dwell upon like the negative of like the politics of what goes on. I just kind of like to focus on the achievements that we have received, that we've gotten in animation, like the Disney movies, Warner Brothers, MGM. Like so many great names have come and gone, but their impact is something that cannot be underestimated. It is something, and we're not going to forget. We'll never forget them because of the marvelous work that they made in animation. That's why I just really adore folks like Richard Williams, people like Ralph Bakshi, Don Bluth, and people who are making these exceptional films. Because they approach it like very very different like philosophies of animation, but they each have their own like unique flavor to it that really push the boundaries of what animation can. I mean, that's like the reason why we kind of grew out of that little like right? Because of people like, Bluth and Bakshi, and eventually Disney started making they and then it would lead to like the Disney Renaissance, and we still got Mr. Williams. So it was just kind of like people like them just really helped save animation from being. I mean, like Disney almost literally went out of like I think their animation department just kind of almost literally shuttered from what I've learned. I think it was the time that they were doing like the Black Cauldron and the Cauldron, I think, yeah. So and they came really close to shutting down in the 80s. So imagine like if we didn't have the Disney Renaissance, who knows where animation would have been if it wasn't for movies like Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, so on and so forth. Like, just imagine. Yeah. So, going back to New York again, so you've studied animation for, I mean, you're the son of a fireman, which is really interesting. High School of Art and Design, you went to School of Visual Arts, and you also went to the Art Students League of New York. So, from your time of schooling and your time of, studying and whatnot, how would you describe your experience? Like, what was the thing that you really got the most out of it? What was sort of like the lesson that you learned in school that really stuck with you, and it's something that still carries with you even to this very day, and quite possibly for the rest of your life, if we're going to be totally honest.
Yeah. Well, actually, what I really kind of learned was that the old cliche, you can see far when you stand on the shoulders of giants. And there's a lot of people running around, holding a stylus going, I'm an animator now. I downloaded a program, and like, it's not that easy, and what I learned about animation is that it's not just drawing funny pictures and making them move around. It's performance. You're basically acting. You're an actor with a pencil, or now a stylus, and it's how you make something move. Because one of the things one of my old teachers used to say was, you could put anything under a single frame camera and push it around. You could put a rock or something and move around. It's going to move around, big deal. It's how it moves around, and what it does is entertainment. And which we learn from the older artists, just like actors look at technique of old actors, or even like sports figures, like ball players, talk about the technique of ball players from generations ago. So we learn from old artists, and we learned, like, like what they did was successful and what wasn't successful. And and Richard Williams was a big proponent of that. He really wanted us to learn from older artists. and to get things from them. And one of the other things that they told us was cartooning and animation involved in cartooning was just another form of drawing, that it comes out of life drawing. And so getting in front of the model, and drawing is just it's a basic exercise for you. It's like Shakespeare to an actor. Like it never goes away. You're always going to use it, you know. And then once you learn the techniques and the practices of the older artists, you want to add your own touch to it, the things that mean something to you. It's like one of the there was an old animator who used to work at Terry Tunes and at Paramount Pictures, and he once told me, he said, when you become an animator, you become a part of the priesthood of the goddess. You become a devotee of the goddess, and you get your robes and everything, and you shave your head, whatever. You're now like part of the priesthood. But then the goddess says to you, "What are you bringing me?" So like just knowing it is not enough. You have to bring something from yourself, and it's your personal thing. So Brad Bird was raised in a small seacoast town in the Northwest, I think in Oregon or something. And so he brings that sensibility. I'm an inner city kid. I grew up on subway trains and buses and things, and I don't relate really to the countryside. But so I bring an urban sensibility to my stuff. So it's finding finding your voice, and being able to connect with people is fun.
Yeah. Um, so I know that you also met your wife at CSVA, and yeah, since you two have been married for like over 40 years, how would you say that it also helped you with your life and also with your animation career in general?
Well, you'll find it in businesses like film, in media, animation and live action films too. A lot of times, professional partnerships or professional relationships are usually the best, because it's a little hard for people who don't understand the business to relate to like why you're, what you're going through. you know like you come home from work and you go, God, I didn't get the pig. I wanted the pig, but no, they gave it to him. I could have done the pig. And your spouse is expected to go, oh. you know when like if they don't understand, they're like, what the hell are you doing? Grow up. So the nice thing about having because my wife was in the business as well, and she's worked on a lot of movies too. She's worked on Little Mermaid and Roger, and she also did live action films like Pocahontas, like Pacific Rim, and Iron Man, and a bunch of those things. So we, the two of us, had like large lives, and the nice thing is that when it's a good partnership. So when one of us is on overtime, the other one puts the garbage out and feeds the cats and changes the litter. And so there's a nice kind of give and take that way. And we have no regrets. It's been fun.
Right. So yeah, after you graduated from school, then that's pretty much when you started working with people like Harvey Kurtzman and Shamus Collane, and then that's also when you worked with, like you said, you mentioned earlier that you worked on Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, with Richard Williams. So um, I was kind of curious about how that whole production, like, because I know that Richard's productions are kind of known for being very ambitious, and there's a lot of like delays and whatnot, long production. So I wanted to ask first, before I even get to the other film that I'll mention in a second. So with Raggedy Ann and Andy, what were some of your fondest memories of working on that little production
Well,
back in 1976? Yeah.
yeah. Well, that was a uh, that was like sort of an exceptional kind of project, because the scene in New York at that time was sort of the tail end of the Mad Men era. So it was all commercials. So lots of commercials. There's some beautiful commercials. I mean, I worked for Jack Zander, who's an old animator from MGM. He's an old Tom and Jerry animator. But everybody, we were all doing commercials, all doing things like Welchade and Cereal and Tony the Tiger and stuff like that. Um, and then this project for Richard Williams comes up, and it's this big movie musical, like big budget musical with all full animation, all because at that time too, a lot of animation was limited. Everybody was doing very budget conscious stuff, and this one was like, just go for it, make it as beautiful and complex as you could. The guy who wrote the music for Raggedy Ann and Andy, Joe Raposo, was the composer of all the Sesame Street music. Like he wrote, "Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street?" You know, and it's not easy being green, things like that.
Yeah.
And so it was a very high profile musical. Um, Ultimately, it didn't do well, theatrically, even though it had a good release. It's almost like it was like sort of predating the kind of musicals that we were going to do in the 1990s. It was almost like too early, I think. Because really, even other musicals didn't do as well at that time either. In the 70s, it wasn't really an era of musicals. And I remember working one night on overtime on the project, and one of our assistants, I mean, a fellow assistant, a friend named Skeets, came in, and he had just gone to like a New York Comic-Con where he saw a premiere, and a sneak preview of a new movie. This is like the summer of '77. And Skeet says, "God, I just saw this amazing movie. It's gonna blow everybody away. It's called Star Wars. It's going to be really big." And I'm like, "Oh, Skeet, I don't like science fiction. I'm waiting for Revenge of Billy Jack. And he's like, "No, no, man, this is gonna blow everything else out of the water." Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, okay, it was a really big hit. Like, who knew? It just that was another film where nobody was expecting it, and it just came out of nowhere and blew everybody away. Talking to friends who had worked on Star Wars, they were saying things that even when they were finishing the movie, nobody expected the thing to be a hit. When they were doing like the final mixes on the film, they couldn't get preferred studio time because everything, like Martin Scorsese had a movie about surfing, and that got all the good studio time, and Star Wars got the graveyard shift, which was like 11 at night till 4 in the morning. Which is the only time that they could get to like mix their film. Even Alec Guinness, the Obi-Wan Kenobi, was like, it's a kiddie movie. I remember him actually being interviewed where he was being, he's in his whole Obi-Wan robes, and he's telling the camera, "This is a very nice kiddie movie. Take the family, have a good time." like like he didn't know it would be so gigantic, the hit it was. But the '70s was that kind of weird phase of, again, a generational shift, and the studios were going through a generational shift, which was from the '50s. The studios were like big dream factories, huge lots and all, and they had gone through a economic downturn because of television and the shrinking market for movies, and a lot of people, a lot of these studios, either went out of business or they realigned with big corporations. So that's when, like, Universal was bought by Seagram's, the whiskey company, and then later you had Sony buying up Columbia and TriStar and MGM. So there was this realignment going on of these studios, and they would either, the ones that didn't get into television would die, and then the other ones would change, just do all television. So animation was kind of part of that, like trying to find itself and its new audience. And it took like till the 80s to when this stuff all started to come back again.
Yeah, yeah. Because Raggedy Ann and Andy, it's really I mean, I just really find this stuff so fascinating on how like Star Wars was just coming out, the first one, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is the next big thing, and it's like, really, okay. And then who knew that it would become a cultural phenomenon like almost 50 years later?
Yeah, yeah,
Like for about like half a century now. So it's like, wow, okay, maybe
yeah,
George Lucas was onto something.
yeah. The other interesting thing that was happening at that time was I was working in Midtown Manhattan, and I heard from friends that out in Long Island in the suburbs there was this little institute called the New York Institute of Technology, and there was a rogue millionaire, like an Elon Musk type, named Alex Shore, and Alex Shore was hiring computer engineers because he wanted to make a feature length movie by with a computer. And we were all like, that's crazy. Like, who the hell at that time computers were only used by like James Bond villains. Like they were like these big wall-sized things in The Man from Uncle that they were going to be used to blow up the world. So the idea of making a cartoon with a computer, it's like drawing with a missile. Like, nobody's going to use that stuff. But what we found out about later, like I knew later, was that the people that were hired at New York Tech, people like Ed Catmull and Alvy Ray Smith and James Blinn and Ralph Guggenheim and Bill Reeves, would later go on to be uh, uh, the core of a company we all know as Pixar, because they started at New York Tech, and then after Star Wars, they all went to work for George Lucas as the Lucasfilm Graphics Group, and then after that they became Pixar, but they were there at the very beginning as well. It's just interesting that these different aspects were happening. After Raggedy Ann, I was working with Seamus Culhane on a children's film, and I was like his assistant. And Seamus was an old animator who he animated on Snow White, he animated on Gulliver's Travels, he animated on Pinocchio, and now like he was an old man and I was a kid. And but I remember he used to go over to the New York Institute of Technology to see what they were doing with the computers. And he came back, and we'd be sitting in his office, and I'd be working on stuff, and he'd be typing on his manual typewriter. And he'd look up at me and he goes, computers are coming, going to change everything. Business is never going to be the same. And I looked at him and I was like, that's nice, old man. Lie down. Like, who the hell knew? Like, yeah, it really did become it really was a big change, and he saw it coming. That's why I dedicated my computer history book to him. So
Man, that is amazing. That is really something. Yeah. Um, because I think on that movie, like Raggy and Andy, you met Eric Goldberg, Art Babbitt, John Kingmaker, and a bunch of other folks. And I mean, and then I think you kind of were doing like commercial animation work at that time. I mean, you spent like a few years working in New York and Toronto, but yeah, and then you've moved to LA. So how is it like making the transition, like moving from NYC to LA to work in animation,
yeah,
like for
well,
companies out here?
yeah, I think the move of New York to LA is like the biggest at the time, was like the biggest change you could do, because they're very different climates, they're very different social working climates and things. Like the New York studios were all these like little places doing commercials in Sesame Street mainly. And you come out here and it's all the big factories. Hanna-Barbera had like 1,200 people and 12 series going at the same time. And and all these like famous artists walking around. And everything was on a big scale, big features and things. I used to say that the difference between working in New York and working in LA is that you're working on a film in New York and you go, okay, for the voice, let's get somebody who sounds like William Shatner. And when you're working in LA, you go, let's get William Shatner. And you could do it. He'll show up. Like I found out later, like a lot of celebrities like to do animated voices because it's an easy gig. Like you don't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a trailer out in the desert and be in makeup by 5 a.m., and put in a 10-hour day. You just go to the studio, do your voice work, and then you go home at 5 o'clock and be with your family. And they're like, oh, I like this. you know and nobody cares what you look like. I remember like Sharon Stone came in to record for ants, and she was in sweats and she had a zit on her nose. Like nobody's paying attention. And then later on, when you're out in public, that's when you're made up to look like, wow. Like completely different. Like I ran into her at an event at the Academy, and it was like she was dazzling. She was so pretty. So
I mean, of
it's
course she is.
yeah. So but so animated voices are kind of fun, for a number of celebrities. It took I mean, in the beginning, years ago, they didn't use celebrities. Partly was that the money was not as good as it is now. So celebrities weren't being paid celebrity wages. Which that kind of started, I think, with Robin Williams, with
Yeah.
Aladdin and stuff. That's when it all started to become big name voices and all.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was kind of like that before, where I know that the Disney films of old, they would actually credit the celebrities, but I think this trend really started kicking off, taking full like effect. Like I know that it was especially obvious with like Robin Williams. Now, there's an interesting little history. I mean, I remember watching a video not too long ago talking about the history between Disney and Robin Williams, which is very interesting. Too long to name here, but to even go over here. But essentially, it kind of sort of um was the movie where it's like, oh yeah, big A-list celebrities, like that's gonna they're like huge money makers, and I get it. I know, like, because in Hollywood, that's pretty much how it is, where you get celebrities to do the main leads, like the voices and the voiceover artists. They're calling for extras. It's kind of been something that's been ongoing for like a long time. So I know that, um, like I said, I'm not one to talk because I know there's other animation historians that go into detail more about this than I can. So I'm just somebody who's like, yeah, this is something that's like, it's sort of like a trend where, you have somebody who's like in a feature and then people will see it. Whether or not it's going to be a box office hit or a bomb, who knows? Um, it's kind of like it's like a huge gamble. It's kind of like a huge wild card. Who knows if it's going to be successful? Who knows if it's going to be like, or in some cases, it might cause the studio to like close its doors, like it almost did with Disney back in the '80s. So you just don't know. You just never know. Um, and yeah, and I just noticed that you've worked on like with Hanna-Barbera. I mean, you did mention Hannah from Hanna-Barbera earlier, Filmation, and yeah, I know that they kind of sort of had bad, like, I mean, not to say anything negative, but I know that they kind of had like did not really have the best reputations back in the '80s. So, um, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how when you really go back and watch these, it's like, wow, this is like kind of an interesting, time period of animation. Where with Hanna-Barbera, because I know that when they started their company, they made the animation more like, because I know they had to cut corners for a lot of their shows, but at the same time, it just kind of really, it really paid off because I remember watching a documentary not too long ago where shows like Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Scooby Doo, and those old shows, they became huge hits in television as they moved into TV. And I know that that was kind of like the next big thing, like back in the day. So getting to work on TV animation back in those days, would you say that it's a lot different working in TV animation compared to working on theatrical films? And releases and everything else that you've done.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about television is that you have to produce a lot of animation for television. A feature film is basically, 85 minutes, 87 minutes. That's the Snow White length. I mean, Brad Bird's Incredibles went over 2 hours, and that was considered
Mhm.
unusual. But generally, like about 90 minutes is about the norm. With television, you're turning out, hours and hours of stuff. I mean, He-Man was like 65 half hours, of animation, and that's a lot of material. So you have to rely on what we call reuse, which is like the walks all look the same. When the characters talk in dialogue, the dialogue is the same. You see the same head and the moving mouths, and and with television especially, um, you tend to rely more on dialogue than on action. Because like the old Bugs Bunnies and the old Tom and Jerry's and all was all about physical action, characters chasing each other and falling down and stuff, and all that action is a lot of work. While if characters are saying something funny, you have like one head and moving mouths, and they're saying witty stuff. So you tend to rely more on the dialogue to carry the story than on the physical action. And and the shortcuts are kind of fun, like when you try to figure out how to make shortcuts interesting. So like, I would do a show, I'd work on a thing where a bunch of characters are trying to get away from somebody, and they run into a stairwell and they fall down a flight of stairs. Now in traditional animation, you would animate each character tumbling down the steps and where he lands and all. In the Hanna-Barbera system, they're running in a cycle, and then they run through a doorway that says stairs, and then they run out of the scene into the doorway, and then you shake the camera and you hear ow 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 ooh, 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 ow, ow, ow. And then you cut to them all already on the ground, like in a pile. So you avoid that big, long, complicated action scene. But it's kind of funny, to not see it, just to hear it and try to imagine in your mind like what's going on. So you would do a lot of shortcuts like that. And again, when I was working in Hanna-Barbera in the 70s, a lot of the artists, the main artists that we worked with, like Iwo Takamoto, who designed Scooby-Doo
Oh
and
yeah.
all, they had worked on all the beautiful Hollywood stuff, like the Tom and Jerry's and Sleeping. Iwo was like worked on Sleeping Beauty at Disney's and all before he went to Hanna-Barbera. So these guys, old folks, knew exactly where to cut corners. Like they knew like how to make it less complicated, but yet it still was entertaining. Like you still enjoyed, looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know when you mention the comedic timing in the cartoons, I know that some of the jokes or gags would just have the characters get flattened by something off screen, and that's kind of what makes it even funnier. Because I know that Chuck Jones, like the Wile E. Coyote and the Coyote Roadrunner shorts are a good example because sometimes I know it's kind of like okay, so it's just a coyote chasing a roadrunner, but Chuck adds a lot of variety with the jokes, and with the amount of failures that the coyote runs into. Like, I mean, of course, you could show him like falling off, a ledge, or sometimes you could just have him fall off screen, or just get hit by something, and or it doesn't have to always be like, um, yeah, there's like a different variety for how the slapstick and the physical comedy really works. Like we all know the rabbit season, duck season gag from Bugs and Daffy and Elmer, those shorts, and there's also Tom and Jerry, which would, like you said, a lot of it is all like it's physical comedy, and the reason why it really works so well is because the animation in those shorts, and if I believe that MGM kind of had a larger budget than Warner Brothers, so they were able to have like much more fluid and just downright sophisticated animation. Now for Tex Avery, his animation mostly is a lot more like looser, crazier, wilder gags in his shorts. and Tom and Jerry mostly revolves around the physical comedy. So I will say that both of them, like when you watch a Tom and Jerry short and then you watch a Tex Avery short, you kind of start to see like there is a lot of friendly competition with just how quick and just fast and who can produce the biggest laughs with how much of the physical comedy that they can really do and really do things that you can't really do in live action. That's something that Tex Avery had thrived on because one of his mottos is like in a cartoon you could do absolutely anything, and I just like how pretty much the jokes are, it's kind of like it's from one gag to the next and it just works very very well, especially for somebody like me who's like really who is always kind of like the fast-paced cartoony action type of kid back in the day. I know there's a lot of new stuff that is out now that I'm really enjoying. So yeah, those are like pretty good examples. And for TV animation, I know that you couldn't really do that, like just like how they did it in the old days. But at least like coming up soon, there was like so I mean we're just about to get into the mid '80s part where animation was about to boom in a very big way. It was about to make a huge resurgence, and a large part of that is due to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yes, we're going to talk about that crazy wascally rabbit himself. So yeah, tell us about Roger Rabbit and the whole, you know, history and story about working with Richard once again on that project. Now, I know that he also made like another animated short. I can't remember. I think it was Yeah, I can't really pronounce it, but yeah, I know he was working on something else at the time. So yeah, Roger Rabbit. Let's hear all about it. Let's talk
Well,
about it.
well, the book was written by Gary Wolfe in the late '70s, and it was called "Who Censored Roger Rabbit," and he wanted to write a Philip Marlowe, Raymond Chandler style detective story about the murder of about a murder involving a cartoon character, and that cartoon characters walked around with human beings, and they worked at the studios just like everybody else. And Disney bought the rights to it, but then it kind of sat on their shelf for a little while. There was an animator named Daryl Van Sitters who was trying to get Roger off the ground to try to get the project going, but it was hard to get the studio management at the time was very conservative, and they didn't want to take a gamble on something like that. An untried character. They wanted to go with more their old stuff. And really, it was after the regime change where Roy Disney took control of the company and brought in Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg to kind of help turn the studio around, because they had already done something like that at Paramount. And so there was an upkeep in production there. And what happened was Jeffrey Katzenberg, our producer, was friends with Steven Spielberg. They were longtime friends, and Steven had just done a resuscitation of Warner Brothers, where Warner Brothers Animation died in 1969. Basically, it really kind of ended. Chuck Jones went off and did his own projects, Chuck Jones Productions or Acme Productions. But he left the company, and Tex Avery had left the company, and Friz Frayling formed the Patty Frayling to do Pink Panthers. But Warner Brothers itself had kind of stopped doing stuff till around 1985, and that was because Spielberg was producing Tiny Toons and then later Animaniacs and all, and that sort of led to a revival. So because he was friends with Jeffrey and Jeffrey was Disney, the idea was, if we could take this project, this Roger Rabbit idea, we could put Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny face to face for the first time. Because Steven's like, I'll bring Bugs and you bring Mickey, and they'll be face to face in this cartoon. And then the idea was to get Robert Zemeckis as the director, because Zemeckis had just done Back to the Future and had done Romancing the Stone, and he had had a lot of success, with these type of effects movies. And then Richard Williams also came in because he was sort of neutral, because Spielberg wanted it done by Amblin, and Disney wanted it done on the Disney lot. So the compromise was to use Richard Williams, who was British, so it was a sort of neutral ground. And and Dick, of course, was a fan of all the old animation. So that was sort of the genesis of how the thing came together. And I think, let's see, they had to pay to get Betty Boop, and they had to pay to get Woody Woodpecker. The MGM wouldn't give them Tom and Jerry, and we couldn't get
Yeah.
Popeye. It's like those are the
Yeah.
big ones. You're like,
Oh, I
oh
remember that. Yeah. I think
yeah,
there was like a deleted scene where like they were at a funeral and like Popeye and Tom and Jerry were there, but like it was
yeah,
actually Casper that
yeah.
I've read online, but too bad that scene is never going to see the light of day.
Yeah. That was a cut scene, and
Yeah.
it's funny because I remember when they were cutting stuff, Bob Zemeckis told us, he says, look, like this is in PBS. We're not doing 9 hours here. We got to keep this movie to 90 minutes. No,
Yeah. At
yeah,
least we got Droopy though.
yeah, it did get droopy, which was good. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I animated Woody Woodpecker at the end doing his famous laugh, the
Oh, nice.
thing.
Yeah.
And
I don't know how we do. I
uh,
don't even know how. I mean, I know there was a way, but I don't even know because, like, I know that the laugh was by Mel Blanc. To this day, I just don't even know how he did everything that he could do. So yeah, it just
yeah,
amazes me. So,
yeah, and it's interesting, yeah, because it was like some of Mel Blanc's last work.
oh yeah, it
He,
was
yeah,
some
he
of
died
his last.
years
Yeah,
later. Yeah, just like Mae Questel, who was the voice of Betty Boop,
yeah,
he still
Betty
did.
Boop.
He
Yeah,
still did the voice. And May died, I think, after 1990. It was 1991, I think.
I
So
not actually. Let me look at it quick.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So
Oh,
anyway,
1998. Okay.
oh okay. Oh, she had a good. Oh, good. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I met her in 1990, and she was already like way up there in age, but she still
Oh,
had the voice.
1908.
Yeah,
Yeah, she could
yeah,
still do it. 1909.
yeah.
Yeah. Like
Mhm.
especially that late in her life, she just gave it her all. She could still do it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Excellent. Yeah.
so
So
it was
anyways,
Yes, so it was kind of fun that a lot of the animators who got together, who they put together, like Andreas Deja and Willie Beyer and James Baxter and stuff. We all got together because we loved the old cartoons, and to get a chance to animate those cartoons and do justice to the old artists, to do it like the way they would have wanted it done, which is not limited animation, not low key and everything, just to be as crazy as possible, was just a lot of fun. And all there was a lot of fun to work with, and it was a big budget production. And because up till then people were always telling you to cut corners and to try to like keep the price down, keep it trim, don't go crazy. And here's a movie where they said go crazy, go ahead, and that was like very refreshing to be able to get a
yeah.
chance to do that, and the film was a big hit. So
Mhm.
I mean, the first time I was back in New York for the premiere, and you saw lines around the block like police barricades, like for a Star Wars movie, except to see a cartoon. You're like, wow, that was amazing.
Yeah. What was I also going to say? Yeah, that's kind of like the similar attitude that I get. That's sort of like the vibe when you watch a Ralph Bakshi film, because like Ralph Bakshi and his animators, they just pretty much go nuts. There's like, nope, just you know what? Nah, we're just gonna break all the rules and we're just gonna be rebellious. Just do whatever the heck you want to do. That's just pretty much the same vibe that I would get if you're watching like, yeah, a Ralph Bakshi movie. At least for me, though.
Mhm.
But that is really interesting to know about because Roger Rabbit it was such a gigantic hit. Like the critics and audiences love it, and it kind of was the turning point on make having people become very interested in the golden age of animation again.
Yeah, yeah,
And it was um, just phenomenal. Yeah.
hmm hmm that's true. That's true. Yeah. So, do you have anything in conclusion? Because I know we're over an hour right now. So,
Oh, yeah. because I know you've worked on the Disney movies from like the 90s, and I know that the times working on those was like, I just wanted to ask, like, if you could quickly recall like your best memories of working on like Mermaid, Beast, Aladdin, you know, the movies that you worked on in the 90s, Pocahontas. Yeah, just to quickly go over them because I know that they were also like very um just also really groundbreaking films in their own right because they it was during the time of the Disney Renaissance. So how would you look back on the Disney Renaissance today?
Well, yeah, I think it was like a great, yeah, it was a great time to be working on those films, and it's funny because I'd already seen music in their animated films, and of course, I've worked on a lot of musicals, but Howard Ashman and Alan Menken just kind of brought a special, you know, a special thing to the writing and the music where the music was very central and it was very catchy. Like the problem with earlier musicals was when you see a musical in the theater, basically you're paying a lot of money to sit in a theater and there's a guy standing on stage going and singing, and you're like, okay, so I paid all this money, I'm going to listen to them sing. But when you in a theater, in a movie, and you see somebody singing, they better be doing something. Because just standing there singing is not enough. You got to be moving or acting, and some early musicals, the characters literally would stop what they were doing and sing the song, and then the plot would continue. And you go, you have to wait for the song to be over before the plot will keep going. But Ashman and Menken had a way of working the plot into the songs. So the beginning song of Belle, in Beauty and the Beast, there goes the baker with
Yes.
his bread like always, the same old food to sell. He put the plot in the song. So she's saying, I'm Belle, I live here, but I'm not happy. I want an adventure. And then I'm Gaston. I like Belle. She doesn't like me. I don't care. I'm going to get her anyway. And you get all that stuff from the songs. And that's what Ashman was great at. And he also was very fun. His dialogue was very witty. So like, hey, clear the way in the old bazaar. Hey, you, let us through. That's a bright new star. Oh, come be the first on your block to meet his eyes. Da 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 da. It's like the songs were fun, to see, and those actors brought an extra something to them. People always wonder about, well, why is it always celebrities? Why is it always like famous people? Well, I've worked with regular voice actors and I've worked with very good voice actors and I've worked with
Yeah.
celebrities. And sometimes they're celebrities for a reason. Like there's a reason why Eddie Murphy was a millionaire at 23. He's very good. So when you work with him, he's very good. And a lot of the stuff they say is excellent. Like working with Lawrence Fishburne, he's a Shakespearean trained actor, so he gives you a lot of good stuff to work with, and getting a chance to work with all these great people, all these great
Right.
actors and talent is so inspiring, and it just gives you so much to work with. Just like when we were doing Lion King, at first nobody thought Lion King was going to be that big a deal. Everybody thought Pocahontas was going to be the bigger movie, and Elton John had done the music, but most of the time when we were working with Elton's music, we just got a cassette with him with a little keyboard, and he's just sort of singing the song himself. And so hearing his voice and the keyboard, but it was Hans Zimmer who later brought in all the African drums and Ladysmith Black Bombazo, and all the rich African sort of percussion. So the first time we saw Circle of Life with everything, with the full score, everybody was blown away. They were all like, "Wow, this is really beautiful." The music is just it's so rich and everything, and that's when we really knew we had something. Like this is really going to be big.
Yeah. The same can also be said for DreamWorks because you've mentioned you worked on Ants, Egypt, Polly Spirit, and of course, the big one, Shrek, which has become a phenomenon in its own way. I mean, like, there's like fan conventions from what I could gather, and there's like so much merchandise and just the internet has pretty much ran wild with it. So yeah, and I know that I'm pretty sure a lot of people also remember the story of how and it's really funny too because I was just watching some of his stuff like just not too long ago. Chris Farley, like he was the original Trek, but then after he passed away, then it went to Mike Myers. So was there like a huge difference with Shrek? I know you kind of answered this on the What's in My Head podcast, but what was so like? Do you feel like there's like a huge shift in direction, like as far like when it comes to Shrek's character and just how the overall production of that movie was after Chris Farley had passed, and it went to, and then Mike Myers had to step in and take over for, such a late beloved comedian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the great thing with Chris is that yeah, Chris would take like whatever the dialogue, however the dialogue was written, he would take it and make you laugh. He just had a way
Yeah,
of doing stuff
he was
that,
really good at it.
yeah, he was very funny, a
Yeah.
very nice man too in person and all.
He-
So yeah, it was a shock when he passed away. And and Mike Myers was like his best friend, and everything. So he agreed to step in, and do the project. And then like partly through, Mike's decided I want to do Shrek with a Scottish accent, and you're like, okay. So then we had to like refix all the scenes that had been done up till then, so that it matches his accent. So it went through a lot of changes. It went through a couple of directors and a couple of rewrites and all, because the children's book was very small. Like the William Steig book of Shrek is something like 13 pages. It's like a small book, and we had to make a 90-minute movie out of it. So you had to fill out all that detail, on the character. And I swear, like up until the weekend it opened, I didn't know what it was going to do. People were like, "Do you think this will be a hit?" I don't know. And then it was a gigantic hit, and you're like, "Wow."
It was. Came out. I mean, it came out the same year as like what was it? Like Monsters Inc. and like I think it
Yeah,
just kind of was like the time where like CGI was starting to become like the next hot thing.
yeah,
And while I love traditional animation, and I really, really do, it just showed that to companies that CGI is kind of the way to go. And while I do really miss like the traditionally 2D animated stuff, like what we've been getting with CGI, like especially now, we've been getting like some really great stuff that has been coming out in the last few years. Let's see, I know there's like streaming services that people are making, like for Netflix, Hulu, and stuff like that. And for movie theaters, like I think it's really safe to say that the pandemic had really changed like how we work in the industry, like even more so with these past few years because we've all kind of been working from home. We're kind of doing remotely. We're just working freelance and stuff like that. So I don't know what the future's going to hold for the industry, but hey, nowhere else to go but up.
yeah,
And I also love how in the 2000s you've done, I think it was Osmosis Jones, Looney Tunes, yeah, yeah, I'm just kind of listing off like the amount of
yeah.
work that you've done. So, yeah, I just wanted to ask real quick, like, and I know that I think I've seen, like, read like a magazine that you were listed as one of the most important people in animation, which, yeah, I definitely can't argue with that. So, I know I bet you probably must wear it with honor and pride for being one of the most biggest names in the entire industry.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
And yeah, I'm sorry.
uh, I was saying, did you have a question on that? Or?
Oh no, I was gonna say, how is it like to be like regarded as one of the most important people?
I see, I see. Well, I mean, you do your work and everything, and it's nice to know that you can make a difference. And I was very fortunate that a number of the projects that I worked on did well. And it's funny because even the movies that financially don't do well, sometimes they have a shelf life afterwards. Like Osmosis didn't do well in its initial release, but it's been seen in schools and it's been seen by a lot of people since then. And what I was thinking is interesting is that I get a lot of fan mail from like doctors and people who teach in medical schools, where it's like the uh, uh, medical students and stuff, like get off on seeing Osmosis Jones because it's explaining like bodily functions and all in a way that everybody can understand. And we actually had a couple of advisors on the film who were professional medical people. So I could call them up and ask them, like, how high can the human temperature go before organ failure begins? Oh, about 105. Like, oh, okay, thank you. And start to figure out all these different things. But it's I mean, the fun is just going from picture to picture, and then you suddenly look up and go, wow, that's a that's a pretty good run. And so I'm feeling pretty good about my record and all. And i
Yeah.
love to I love working with young people now, because I thought when I was young, a lot of older artists took their own time to take time to teach me and to kind of help me with my career. I don't know, it's a little fireman's kid from Brooklyn. Like, what the hell, what am I to them? But they understood it. They saw a kindred spirit, and they saw somebody who could keep on their legacy. So when I'm teaching young people, I feel like I'm paying back to them, like I'm giving them, I'm repaying my debt, for giving me a nice career.
Yeah. So for one of my last questions, since we are definitely running out of time here, so talk about your because I know that a lot of people they do look up they hold you in high regard because as being a board member for the ASIFA Hollywood and Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, you could just talk about your time being on the board of governors and representing the feature animation and short films division. You could just talk about your time of serving as vice president and just working in the unions and, if we're going to talk about the union stuff, because that's always fun to talk about on my podcast.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially
Well,
this year.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that the thing to understand is that the animation community is a very small community, and when you figure with the rest of Hollywood and live action and television and games and all that kind of stuff, so we all know each other, and we're all kind of a family because we're the same kind of tribe of I think Bob Kurtz, is one animation director, said we're all wonderfully damaged people. That's how we like to do this crazy thing,
That's a
this
pretty good
crazy
way of
thing.
putting it.
That funny?
Dark
Yeah,
way,
yeah,
but I agree. Ah,
yeah, yeah.
wow.
So I think there's a lot of like the thing that I found out, that when you're working this way, is that you have your biological family, that's your family, and then you have your professional family. And you have your elders like Chuck Jones and Seamus Culhane, and you have your children, and you have your crazy cousins like Ralph Bakshi and John Crick Falusi or something.
Oh
you know
yeah,
so but we are of a family. And a lot of people in the film community, when I say film community, I'm speaking in terms of like a label of just meaning entertainment in general. But you find that a lot of people put in volunteer work to make things happen. I mean, the Motion Picture Academy is mostly volunteers, and ASIFA is mostly volunteers. It's people doing stuff beyond the community. Like June Foray, who was the voice of Rocky the Flying
oh
Squirrel,
yeah,
was at every meeting. She was at every event. She was hosting stuff. She was sponsoring things. She was always doing stuff. God bless her. And yeah, she died just short of her 100th birthday. So
yeah,
within like 3 months of her 100th. But and she was working all the way up to the end practically. Like she said, she was like, she'd say, "Don't print my age because like I want to keep getting work." And but what's great is that there is that little extra something that people do to because we have to promote animation, because people will kind of like forget about it. Like you have to uh, you know uh, remind people that this is an important art form, and it's a very and you know and it's a very influential art form, and it deserves preservation and continuation, and to know that there's a history to it. I mean, was very involved with the Academy Museum that just opened this year. They've
Nice.
been talking about doing a museum for 100 years. Like in the 1920s, they were talking about we need a museum, and here we actually built the damn thing finally, and we made sure that animation is an important part of it. So there's a good size animation wing to it, and I think we're going to keep adding to it and all, and keep it growing because you want to remind people that there was this amazing stuff being done, and it's worth a second look because you'll have a good time, and you'll enjoy seeing what you're seeing, and the fact that we're in Hollywood. I know, like, we talk about Hollywood as a town, but Hollywood as a generic thing is Southern California. Like when I was in when I was giving a lecture in Japan, and they would say, "Well, you're a Hollywood guy," and I go, "Well, technically, I live in the Valley and I work in Glendale, and and they go, "No, it's all Hollywood. It's all Hollywood to them." So,
Right.
but so when people come and visit here, like right now, you can go to Hollywood Boulevard and you can see all the foreign tourists stepping over the junkies and the hookers, looking for Hollywood, and
Yeah.
it's like we got to give it to them. It's like when I go to Paris, I want to see Paris. I don't want to go to a McDonald's or a Starbucks. I want to see Paris. So we have that legacy. The great artists and filmmakers of the 1930s and 40s entrusted us with this business so that we could hand it on to the next generation, healthy and vibrant and dynamic. And I've tried to do a lot of sort of volunteer work to make sure that kind of thing happens, and and a lot of other people feel like that as well. And I think it's bearing fruit, because the museum's doing well, and the fact that there's people are very excited about the old films, that's a great thing too.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned earlier that you're also a teacher, you're an animator, writer, historian, educator. So what do you really get the most out of teaching and educating young artists everywhere? And what would be something that, if what's the biggest piece of wisdom that you were to give to somebody who is like, new and is getting their start in the industry? What is something that you really love and enjoy the most out of, educating a new young generation of artists out there ever getting into the business?
Well,
Even their names out there pretty much, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. The best thing that I try to teach people is that yeah, it's like learn everything that's gone before, and then you'll know how to move everything onward. I think it was Churchill who said art without tradition is like sheep without a shepherd. It's like you need to know what happened before to know where you're going to go. So Osamu Tezuka, who was like one of the great manga and anime people, and a lot of the next generation of Japanese directors worked under him, like Miyazaki and all, and Oshii and stuff. Tezuka loved Disney stuff. He watched Bambi like 80 times or something. He was learning from that, and then that generation was learning from Tezuka. So we learn from the past, and then go forward into the future. So if you're going to get in this field, don't neglect your past, look at it, and then see what was successful and what wasn't successful, and apply it to what you want to do. So that's like Art Babbitt, who's like one of the great animation teachers, used to say that you learn the rules and then you learn to break them. And that's been a pretty good motto to live and work by. So
Yeah. So with books, and I know since we are approaching like it's almost gonna be 3:30. So talking about your books real quick, yeah, I know you've shared some of your bibliography, Bible, sorry, you've shared like, the cookbooks and whatnot. So, for the, with your experience of being an author of several books yourself, so what is your goal? Like, what did you wanted to achieve or accomplish when it comes to making your own, putting out your own work? Like, because you got many helpful resources for people out there. So with that, what do you really enjoy, and what's something that you really got out of doing it, and what's something that you really want people to learn the most out of reading your stuff and getting to digest and absorb information from your writing chops? I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that, I'm a film historian,
Oh
and
yeah.
and history, as an art, as an art of study, history came out of storytelling, because the very first historians, like, like Homer, and the bards of the Middle Ages, and those folks, they were all storytellers. And being a coming as I was a story artist in a lot of films, which is also storytelling. And a lot of times, you can learn a lot from anecdotes, and from talking about people who lived before, because there'll be a time where people will go, who's Chuck Jones, or who's Tex Avery? And you want to make sure people remember who those people were, because they were very important. It's like saying, who's Charlie Chaplin, or who's Buster Keaton? These were all very important people who made very important films. And so being able to bring those people back to life, in my writing, and being able to explain to people what happened before, I think will help them and not only having a more enriching relationship with the art, with the films they're watching, but should they want to go into a field like this, they have a basis or a foundation to build upon.
Yeah. So, well, that's a pretty something that's really good to take out of it. So, I just want to say real quick, congrats for being awarded the, what is it, the June Foray Award at the Annie Awards from IASIFA Hollywood, and you're also awarded the Dusty Award for Alumni Lifetime Achievement from the School of Visual Arts. So, I just want to say congratulations for all the awards that you've accomplished and achieved over the years. Just wanted to
Thank,
get that out there.
thank you very much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was even surprised that the cookbook got an award. I didn't expect
Yeah.
that.
I mean, honestly, I don't think, yeah, I'd probably be just as surprised too.
Who knew? So anyway, well, thank you all for this conversation.
Yeah, of course. Do you have like any upcoming work or projects that we can look forward to that you want to share right now?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm working on a book about the animation renaissance, of the 1990s, and about how, all the
Nice.
changes that happened then, and basically telling our story. And that might come out, probably in another year, so probably the end of 23 or something like that, if I'm lucky. And yeah, and it's just fun, and then I'll probably write something else after that, but who knows? So
Yeah. And I know we've shout out, like we gave a lot of names and we gave so many mentions to some great people. So I was gonna ask, like, who are some of your favorite people that you've worked alongside with in the industry? But I think you kind of answered most of my questions in like an hour and a half, just talking about your career.
yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah, like I said, I was fortunate in that yeah, a lot of like really nice people, great people, kind of mentored me, and kind of gave me advice and stuff my own career. So that's why I feel good that I can pass it on to young people today.
yeah. Do you have any hobbies? Like, what are something that not a lot of people really know about you? Like anything interesting or fun or
Well, I think the only kind of hobby I have, when your full-time job is fantasy, reality is where you go to relax.
right? So true.
Yeah, yeah. So I like read history, and I'm
Oh yeah,
interested.
same.
Yeah, yeah. I'm interested in history that has character to it, that has personality.
Yeah.
like today is like what, November 8th.
Yeah.
This is the anniversary of when Doc Holliday, the gunfighter, died. And
Mm,
Doc Holliday was a dentist who very early on caught tuberculosis. And tuberculosis in the 1800s was basically a death sentence. It was incurable, and nobody knew how to stop it. And so he kind of knew that he was dying for most of his life. And it's one of the reasons why he was such a bold gunfighter, was that, he's like, yeah, go ahead, kill me. He'll do me a favor. But he actually won all his gunfights. So he died in a hospital anyway. And his last words were he took a swig of whiskey and said, "Well, I'll be damned." Like, you know, you know, like stories like that. Yeah, so I collect stuff like that, like little anecdotes, but stuff that has a little humor to it. That's not just dry, recording of dates and things like that. So
yeah.
all that stuff is kind of fun. When you read a lot of like ancient history, sometimes reading it in the first person, when you read ancient Romans, they kind of sound like us. They sound like regular people. They're
Course.
like in the Middle Ages, like you can't see yourself going on a crusade or taking a vow of silence or something. But you read Roman people, and they like fashions, and they like entertainment, and they like to own things, and go to the games and things like that. And when you read them, they just sound like regular people. So when you could bring those stories back to life and stuff, that's kind of fun. It's
Yeah.
enjoyable.
Well, it has been a pleasure having you here. Do you have like social media or like area? Do you have like any like you could just name your website or just places where people can reach out to you and check out your work and yeah, just to follow you to see where your creative endeavors will be going, in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, well, it's a yeah. I mean, I have a website, tomsito.com, and a Wikipedia page, and all my links are on that. And if you go to Amazon, you just look up my name, and you'll see the list of all my books are for sale. And
Yeah.
I have a bunch of those. And
Yeah.
with the holidays coming, if you want
Right.
an interesting cocktail, you want an interesting roast or something like that, for the holidays, you can check out my cookbook, which is fun. And yeah, and just keep watching cartoons, and I hope everybody has a fun holiday season.
Yeah, likewise. Any last words, like any last bit of wisdom, or just where do you see everything moving forward to in the future? Just everything in general, but what would be your last piece of advice to all the listeners, viewers, to the audience out there?
Yeah, well,
What would
I
you want
think,
to close this out on?
yeah, I would say just there's the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that the more we know what's gone before us, the better we'll know, like, how to move ahead. And things conditions change, and things change, and don't ever feel like, oh, everything's falling or everything's going to be bad. And it continues on, in a different way. And like, I've seen trends in the business. I mean, in 3 more years, I'll be like 50 years in the business, in film, and I've seen ups and downs and ups and downs, and to know that they're never permanent. Whenever somebody says this is the way it's going to be from now on, it usually is. Like 10 years ago, everybody was saying all movies are going to be 3D. Everything's going to be goggle. You're going to put the goggles on in the theater and nothing else. That's all they're going to be, is 3D forever and ever. Amen. And it's over. People don't wear the glasses anymore. I mean, there's very few 3D movies out right now. Just like in
Yeah,
the 80s, in the 80s, when the Chariots of Fire came out, and the soundtrack was done on synthesizer. And they said everything's going to be synthesizer. It's going to be no more orchestras, no more jazz bands, no more rock bands. Everything's going to be electronic forever and ever. Amen. And after a couple of years, everybody went, they went back to, traditional music, instruments. So whenever somebody says this is the way it's going to be forever, don't think that. It's going to change, and all, and change is good.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Totally. So yeah, any last words or just an outro that you want to give for the podcast?
No, I think I gave it.
Yeah, I think I concur. I think this is just pretty much a good way to wrap this up. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this interview of Station Square. Thank you once again, Tom, for stopping by. It's been a huge honor and a pleasure to have such a respected, um, just somebody who is like in the industry that has been working for so long, and it's just really nice to talk to such a really beloved veteran here. So I appreciate it, and yeah, just it's been a lot of fun getting to chat with you. And who knows, maybe we'll do something like this again in the future. Who knows? Maybe we'll see. But until then, stay safe, everyone. This will be posted. Um, this will probably go up either later this evening or tomorrow, depending on how my schedule is. So more episodes will be on the way. So stay tuned next time on the Station Square podcast. This is Robert Jackson signing out of here. And yeah, vote. Happy holidays. And I love you all so much. Bye. Bye bye. Peace.